The judge didn't come to deliver good news. He came to deliver an ultimatum. Marry within 30 days or lose everything. 6 years of blood and sweat. 640 acres carved from nothing with his own 2 hands. All of it would be auctioned off because some politician decided a man needed a wife to own his own land. Ethan Hale had built his ranch alone. He trusted no one. He needed no one. A lifetime of being abandoned had taught him that depending on others only led to heartbreak. But the law was forcing him to find a bride. Enter Clara Whitfield, 26 years old, considered too old for marriage back east, too educated for most jobs, too poor to have a choice. She didn't want his protection. She wanted his respect. He offered her a business deal. She demanded to be treated as an equal. He said separate bedrooms. She said, show me the financial records. But what happens when a man who's terrified of needing anyone starts to need her more than he's ever needed anything in his life? The walls we build to protect ourselves are often the very prisons that keep us from truly living. This story proves that real strength isn't carrying the weight alone. It's finding someone brave enough to share the load, and being brave enough to let them. If you've ever been scared to let someone in, drop a comment telling me what you're learning to trust. And if you want more stories about imperfect people choosing each other anyway, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Your support means everything. Ethan Hale saw the dust cloud coming, 3 riders. He knew the lead horse belonged to Judge Peaton, a man who thought he had more power than the Almighty himself. A visit from the judge never meant good news for his Iron Creek ranch. The judge, a man more suited to a desk than a saddle, got right down to business. He didn't even wait to be invited inside. He said the law had changed, and it was about the legal status of Ethan's property. Every muscle in Ethan's body went tight. The ranch was all he had. For 6 years he had poured his blood and sweat into that piece of scrubland, turning it into something that could last. He had filed his claim by the book, but out here the law could change like the weather. The judge looked him square in the eye. It was bad, and Ethan knew it. The judge explained the new rules from the territorial legislature. To keep any land over 500 acres, a man had to prove he was settled down with a family. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He lived there year-round. How much more permanent could he get? But the judge was firm. Permanent meant a wife. He handed Ethan a notice. He had 30 days to get married or his claim would be forfeited. 30 days to find a wife or lose everything he had worked for. Ethan thought it was the craziest thing he had ever heard, but the judge just said, "Find yourself a wife. It is the law." Just as they were about to leave, the judge's young clerk, Timothy, spoke up nervously. He said there might be an option. A woman named Clara Whitfield had just arrived from Philadelphia. She was 26 and looking for a new start. The judge added that she was staying at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and that Ethan shouldn't waste any time if he was interested. After they left, Ethan stood there staring at the 640 acres he'd bled for. His whole life he had learned that counting on people only led to heartbreak. His father had lost everything chasing dreams, and his mother had been worked to an early grave. Ethan had learned to depend only on himself. But being alone meant losing his ranch. He swallowed his pride and made up his mind. The next morning, he rode into the small town of Copper Springs. He tied his horse outside the boarding house, a clean 2-story building. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who ran the place, answered the door. She was a tough woman who knew everything that happened in town. She said she had heard the judge paid him a visit and told him to wait. Ethan saw his reflection in the window, a man who looked worn down and older than his 28 years. He was about to find out if his luck was about to change. The woman who appeared in the doorway was not what he expected. Clara Whitfield was tall and slender, but she looked strong. Her dark brown hair was tied back neatly, and her gray-green eyes were clear and direct. Her simple blue dress was well made, and she stood with a quiet confidence that was anything but shy. She was not a classic beauty, but there was something striking about her. She had high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. He introduced himself, feeling rough and out of place. "I know who you are," she said, her voice clear and educated. We can speak in the parlor. Well, now, it's not every day a man has to choose between getting hitched and losing his whole life's work. Ethan Hale was in a bind, and he was running out of time. He looked across at Clara Whitfield and laid his cards on the table. He said, "Miss Whitfield, the long and short of it is this. A new law says I have to marry in 30 days, or the government takes my ranch." He told her plain, "This ain't about romance. It is a business deal, pure and simple." But Clara, she was as cool as a cucumber. She just looked him square in the eye and asked, "And what, exactly, would I get out of this deal?" That question threw him for a loop. He figured she would jump at the chance for a roof over her head. He offered her a home and security, a straightforward arrangement. But Clara made it clear that simple was not going to be good enough. "A business arrangement," she said, "needs clear terms. What happens after the law is satisfied? Do you just toss me aside?" Her voice was steady, but it had a bit of an edge to it. Ethan asked her why she even came out west, and her answer hit him harder than a mule kick. She said, "Mr. Hale, I came here because I had nothing left back east. I was too old to marry, too educated for most work, and too poor to have a choice." She told him she was just looking for a place where she could work hard and not be judged. It was a raw, honest truth he was not expecting. He thought he was dealing with a desperate woman, but he was starting to see he had it all wrong. She was not looking for a handout, she was looking for a partnership. "So what do you want?" he asked, truly wanting to know. "I want respect," Clara said. "I want to be a partner, not some nuisance you have to put up with. And if this does not work out, I want enough to start over on my own." She was talking like a real businesswoman, and he had to admit she had a point. So he made her an offer. "Come out to the ranch for 1 week," he said. "No strings attached. See what you think. If you can stand the place and me, we will get married. If not, I will pay your way to wherever you want to go next." Clara thought it over for a long moment. Then she nodded. But she had her own conditions. Separate rooms, a look at the ranch's books, and a promise that she would be treated as an equal partner. It was a tough pill for a man like Ethan to swallow, but with his ranch on the line, he shook her hand and said, "Done." The next morning, Clara was ready with 2 bags and a trunk full of books. She looked more like a ranch hand than a lady from back east. The ride out to his place was quiet. Ethan pointed out a few landmarks, and Clara just took it all in, her eyes missing nothing. When they finally rode over the last hill and saw the ranch spread out below, Ethan felt a swell of pride. The house was solid, sitting in a little valley with a creek nearby. It was not fancy, but it was his. He had built it with his own 2 hands. He watched her face, trying to see what she was thinking as she looked at her potential new home for the very first time. 640 acres, he said, the pride clear in his voice. 300 head of cattle in a good deep well that never runs dry. The place was bigger than she expected and a whole lot more isolated. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away," he told her. She just looked at him and said, "I am used to being alone, Mr. Hale." Inside, the house was just what you would expect from a man living alone. Clean, but built for work, not comfort. A big stone fireplace, a long table, and a couple of rooms. He showed her to her bedroom, a simple space with just a bed and a washstand. While he brought in her things, she walked through the house, taking stock of everything, as if she were already seeing all the changes she would make. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" she asked, her back to him. He mumbled that he ate just fine. "That is not what I asked," she said, pulling out a near-empty flour sack and a can of beans. "Mr. Hale, I can see 6 years of a bachelor's life in this kitchen. When did you last have a fresh vegetable?" He started to get defensive, but she cut him off. "If I'm going to stay for a week, I need to see what is possible here, not just what you have settled for." He sighed. There was no arguing with her logic. "Fine. Make your list. We will go to town tomorrow." "Today would be better," she replied. And that settled it. In town, she moved with a purpose, gathering flour, eggs, potatoes, and other real food while tracking every cent. When Ethan questioned the cost, she looked him square in the eye. Food is an investment. A well-fed man works better. The store owner, Jacobson, just grinned. That evening, Ethan watched as she took over his kitchen. She set a plate before him with roasted chicken, real mashed potatoes, and bread still warm from the oven. It was the best meal he had eaten in 10 years. A quiet thank you was all he could manage to say when he finished. The house felt different with her in it. Fuller. The next few days fell into a pattern. Ethan worked the ranch from sunup, and Clara worked the house. She scrubbed away years of dust and grime he had stopped even seeing. She brought order to the chaotic kitchen. Then she started clearing the old garden plot out back, a patch of dirt he had given up on years ago. She worked hard, that woman from the east, never once complaining about the Arizona heat or the isolation. She just got the job done. He came in one evening to find her at his table, his account book spread open. "Did I say you could look at those?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. She looked up, completely unfazed. "You said I could see the financial records, and they are a mess. You are mixing personal and ranch expenses." She pointed to a column of numbers. "This ranch is barely profitable, and I think it is because of carelessness or theft." She showed him where supplies had gone missing. "Over 6 months, I estimate you have lost $60 to $80. That is a month's pay for a good hand." He stared, shocked that she had found all that in one afternoon. He should have been angry. Instead, he pulled up a chair. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, she walked him through his own business, explaining how to track everything properly. She did it with patience, not condescension. "Will you teach me to do it right?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Her eyes met his. "That depends on whether I'm here past this week." "Right, the trial period." "What do you think so far?" he asked. She looked around the clean room. "I think you have built something worth preserving. But I do not know if you actually want a partner, Mr. Hale, or if you just want a solution to a legal problem. There is a difference." She was getting too close to the bone. He had come to her for a legal fix, plain and simple. But Clara was changing his home, his habits, and the way he thought. He felt torn between wanting the change and fighting it. "I reckon I don't know," he finally said. "It's been a long time since I had anyone around." Clara nodded. "Me too. But there's a world of difference between being alone by choice and being alone because you're scared." "And which one am I?" "You're scared," she said, her voice soft. "Someone taught you that leaning on folks only leads to pain. So you built this fortress and have been standing guard ever since." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. Ethan shoved his chair back and stood up fast. "I'm going to check on the horses," he muttered, gone before she could say another word. Outside, the cool night air did little to calm him. His horse, Chance, ambled over for a scratch. She was right. His whole life had been one long lesson. Depend on yourself because everyone else leaves. He had called it wisdom, learned the hard way. But what if it was just plain old fear? When he came back inside, her door was closed. For the first time in years, he was deeply aware that he was not the only soul in the house. The next morning, Clara wanted to see the cattle. Ethan saddled up Chance for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for her. He figured she'd ride all prim and proper, but she swung into the saddle like she was born there. "My granddaddy had a farm," she said, seeing his surprise. "I've been riding since I was 6. They rode out to the south pasture. After a while of quiet watching, she spoke up. "You're short about 15 head. Ethan's head snapped around. "What?" "I count 283 out here. You told me you had 300. He couldn't believe it. "You counted 'em? Just by looking?" "It's an estimate," she said. "But I'm not off by 17. Either your first count was wrong, or some of your cattle are gone." He scanned the herd, his gut tightening. His spring count had been dead on. She was right. He was missing stock. "Rustlers," he said, the word tasting like rust. "Or they wandered off through a bad fence," Clara offered. "Worth a look either way." They rode the fence line, and it was Clara who found it. A section of wire, clean cut, then patched with new wire that stood out against the old. "Someone's been here," she said, swinging down from her horse. "And not long ago. This wire is too new." Ethan got down beside her, a slow, burning anger building in him. Someone was stealing from his own land. "Could be someone who knows your ways," Clara said, looking him in the eye. "Someone who knows when you're here and when you ain't. You trust the hands you hire for roundup?" He wanted to say yes, but he hired whoever was able and willing. He'd never had a reason not to trust them, but he'd never looked for one either. "I don't know," he admitted. They fixed the fence and rode back, the silence heavy between them. 15 head of cattle was a serious loss. That evening, Clara reorganized his books, setting up a new system to track livestock and fence repairs. It was detailed work. "From now on," she said, "you check a different section every day, random-like. We'll find their pattern." "We?" Ethan asked. Clara looked up from the ledger. "If I stay, Mr. Hale, if we do this, your problems become my problems. I'm not one to sit by and watch my own life happen." It was the closest she'd come to saying she'd stay. A knot in his chest loosened. "2 more days," he said. "Then you decide." "Then we both decide," she corrected him. "This only works if we both choose it." He'd been thinking it was all on her, but she was right. He had to choose, too. Choose to trust. Choose to share this life he'd built alone. He wasn't sure he could. But the thought of her walking back to town for good was worse. He realized he didn't want her to leave. Not because she was useful, but because the house finally felt like a home with her in it. He didn't want her to leave because she saw what his ranch could become. And that scared him more than any lawsuit. On the 6th day, Ethan came back from riding the fence line and found Clara on the porch. A Colt Navy revolver was in pieces on a cloth in front of her, and she was cleaning every part. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "Storage room trunk," she said without looking up. "A rifle's no good if trouble gets up close. I prefer to have a sidearm that works." Ethan just watched her put the gun back together with smooth, practiced movements. "You know how to use that thing?" "My grandfather taught me," she said, checking the action. "He figured a woman ought to know how to defend her home." "You got ammunition?" He found a box of cartridges. Clara loaded the revolver, stood up, and walked out toward the barn. She aimed at a fence post about 20 yards away and fired 6 shots. All 6 hit dead center. She turned back to him, a little smile on her face. "Now it's a functional sidearm." Clara stood 20 yards away, aimed the pistol, and fired 3 quick shots. All 3 hit the post in a tight 6-inch circle. Ethan tried not to look surprised. "Your granddaddy taught you well," he said. Clara reloaded. "I might have been in Philadelphia for the past 8 years, Mr. Hale, but I remember where I come from." That evening on the porch, she finally spoke about his offer. "I have thought about your terms, and they are not enough." Ethan's heart beat a little faster. "If I am to be your wife, I need a true partnership. My name goes on the deed as co-owner, and I need to know that if something happens to you, I will not be thrown off this land." What she asked was fair, but it meant giving up control. "That is a lot to ask," Ethan said slowly. "It is a lot to give," Clara replied. "I would be tying my whole future to this ranch. I think security is a fair trade. And if I say no? Then I will thank you for your kindness and leave in the morning. You will have 23 days to find someone else. And if I say yes? Then tomorrow, we file the deed and we get married on the 30th day. But understand me, Ethan. We will be true partners. That means respect and shared decisions. This ranch will belong to both of us." Ethan stared at the land he had built by himself. He thought he did not need anyone. But this woman was a threat to his stubborn pride. She had found his lost cattle and fixed his account books. In just 6 days, she had improved his home and his life. He found himself listening for her footsteps and looking forward to their quiet meals together. He realized that being alone was not the same as being strong. Just before midnight, he knocked on her door. She was sitting up in bed, waiting. "Yes," he said, "to all of it. Partnership, co-ownership, everything, on one condition. Clara closed her book. What condition? That you give me time, Ethan said. Time to learn how to be a partner. I am not used to it. I will try, but you have to be patient with me. She looked at him for a long moment and then gave him her first real smile. That is the most honest thing you have said to me. Yes, Ethan. I will give you time. We will go to town tomorrow, he said, reaching for her hand. Partners, he said. Partners, she agreed. For the first time, Ethan believed that partnership was not weakness. It was strength. In the dusty land office, a tired clerk named Morrison pushed the papers across the counter. You both need to sign here, he said, not even looking surprised. Miss Whitfield, you understand this makes you a legal partner as of today. Mr. Hale, you are giving up sole ownership. Ethan paused for a second, then met Clara's gaze. He saw the same mix of hope and worry he felt himself. I understand. They both signed their names. Just like that, the Iron Creek Ranch belonged to them both. Before leaving town, they stopped at the office of Reverend Calloway. The 30th of the month, Ethan told him. A simple ceremony. The Reverend nodded kindly. I have married 17 couples out here. The most practical arrangements sometimes become something more. On the ride back, the wagon was quiet. When they reached the edge of their land, marked by a pile of stones, Clara asked him to stop. She climbed down and stood looking out at the property that now belonged to her, just as much as it belonged to him. The wind blew through her hair, and for the first time the ranch felt like a shared home. My granddaddy used to say the land remembers, she said softly. It remembers who worked it, who loved it. It knows if you're just using it or if you mean to stay. What do you think this land remembers? Ethan asked. 6 years of one man's stubborn refusal to quit, she replied. Now we see if it can remember what a partnership feels like. She turned to face him, the sun light in her hair. I meant what I said, Ethan told her. I'm going to be bad at this. So will I, Clara admitted. I've spent 8 years being told I'm too independent and too opinionated for my own good. Those habits die hard. Good, Ethan said, surprising himself. I don't want 'em to die. I just want us to figure out how to make 'em work together. A real smile spread across Clara's face. Then we're starting from the same place, she said. That's more than most folks get. They headed for their house, but something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just his land anymore. It was theirs. Her question hung between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the risk they were both taking. After that week, Clara stayed, and a new rhythm began. She made small, smart changes to the house, and he started including her in ranch decisions. Having to explain himself felt strange after 6 years of answering to no one. It felt like losing control. But Clara never used her position like a weapon. She offered suggestions and respected his expertise. When they disagreed, they talked it through. Slowly, awkwardly, they began to build a real partnership, something far stronger than either of them had expected. Have you ever felt in your gut that you were right, only to have the cold, hard facts tell a different story? That was the tough spot Ethan found himself in. He'd been running his Texas ranch his way for years, but his new partner, Clara, was pointing out some uncomfortable truths in his own account books. It was a showdown between his stubborn pride and her clear-eyed common sense. And with cattle rustlers stealing them blind, they had to solve it fast or risk losing everything. Let's see if a little logic can save a ranch from falling apart. Just 3 days after they signed the deed, their first real argument kicked off. Ethan had decided to hire 2 seasonal hands, Tom Fletcher and Jim Dawson, for a big fencing job. He trusted them. But when Clara reviewed the books that evening, she saw a problem. You hired Tom Fletcher, she said, her voice carefully neutral. The last time he worked here, feed and medical supplies went missing. The same things I pointed out to you last week. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think Tom is stealing from me? I think the timing is suspicious, she answered calmly. He's worked for me for 3 seasons. I trust my judgment. Your judgment didn't notice the losses, Clara said, a new edge in her voice. We should check on this before he comes back. I have been running this ranch just fine for 6 years, Ethan said, standing so fast his chair scraped the floor. I can handle hiring. Clara stood too, her gaze steady. This ranch belongs to both of us now. If Tom Fletcher is stealing, he is stealing from me too. Our property, Ethan repeated, the words feeling sour. 5 days and you are already trying to take over. Do not make this about control when it is about common sense, she said, her expression hardening. I am pointing out what your own records show. She took the ledger and walked to her room, closing the door with a quiet click that felt worse than a slam. Ethan slept poorly, bothered by the silence from her side of the house. In the morning, Clara was up first, which was rare. She had made coffee, but no breakfast. I'm riding out to check the south pasture fence, Ethan said stiffly. I will come with you, she replied in a tone that was not a request. They rode out in a tense quiet. It was Clara who spotted the trouble first, another section of fence that had been cleanly cut and then poorly repaired. Here, she called, swinging down from her horse. Ethan dismounted beside her. The tracks showed that several cattle had been driven through. At least 10, maybe more, Clara said, studying the hoofprints. 2 or 3 riders. A cold fury settled in Ethan's gut. This was planned by someone who knew his routines. We need to track them, he said. We need to report them, Clara countered. This is a job for the marshal. Charging after armed thieves is how people get killed. He knew she was right, and he was tired of fighting it. As they rode back, Ethan turned his horse toward a small supply shack on the property. What are you doing? Clara asked. Checking something, he said. The shack was unlocked. Inside, Ethan immediately saw that a good knife, 2 coils of rope, and a set of wire cutters were missing. Someone has been here, he said quietly. Someone who knew where he kept things. The truth hit him hard. It had to be Tom Fletcher. He sank onto a rough bench, the weight of the betrayal crushing him. You were right, he said. Clara sat beside him. I take no pleasure in being right about this. I hired him 3 times, Ethan said, staring at his hands. I trusted him. Being betrayed does not mean you were foolish to trust, she said gently. It means someone abused your trust. That is on them, not you. Her kindness broke through his anger and shame. I am sorry, he said, for last night, for making this about control instead of listening. I am sorry too, Clara said. We are both going to make mistakes. The question is if we can learn from them. I vote for learning, he said, and she agreed. They rode to town and reported the theft to Marshal Davies. Tom Fletcher, you say? The old lawman said. He has been on my radar. I will get a posse together. That evening, back at the ranch, the silence between Ethan and Clara was comfortable. As they worked side by side, Ethan finally understood. A real partnership was not about being in charge. It was about trusting each other, respecting the facts, and building something better together. It was a strange feeling working together like this. But for the first time in 6 years, the weight of the ranch was not just on Ethan's shoulders. As the sun went down, Clara shared her story. She told him how her father died when she was 14. Her mother quickly remarried a man who saw Clara as a burden. She was sent to live with relatives who offered a roof but no love. She said she learned young that you could not always depend on family. Clara worked for years as a teacher, saving every cent. But her boss made it clear that a single woman with ideas about educating girls would never get ahead. After her aunt passed, her uncle told her to leave. Her only choices were to find a husband or start over somewhere new. Ethan understood then why she came here. Clara explained she came to the territory for freedom and a chance to own her own land, not for a husband. She certainly did not expect to become a rancher in 2 weeks. When Ethan asked if she regretted it, she told him to ask again in a year, after they had faced their first real crisis together. The days leading to the wedding passed quickly. Clara revived the garden while Ethan built a new chicken coop. Together they made the whole ranch more efficient. Marshal Davies returned 5 days later, He had found 9 of the stolen cattle, but the thieves got away. Tom Fletcher had disappeared completely, which proved his guilt. Davies warned them to hire better help from now on. Getting help in town was a real chore. All of Copper Springs was talking about the wedding, and the things they said about Clara made Ethan's blood boil. He heard the nasty jokes about why a woman from the East would marry a rancher she'd just met. It felt like a personal attack. They were painting her as some desperate woman who'd trapped him. When Clara saw the anger on his face, she pulled him right out of the general store. "Let them talk," she said, her voice calm. But he couldn't. "It matters to me," he said. She looked at him holding a bolt of fabric and asked, "Why?" He realized that somewhere along the way she'd become more than a solution to a problem. She was a person he respected. "Because you deserve respect," he finally told her. "What we're building here is better than their cheap gossip." Clara's face softened, but she reminded him they couldn't fight the whole town. As they rode home, he knew she was right. They had a partnership, a friendship even. But they still slept in separate rooms, with a line between them neither one dared to cross. A week before the wedding, the summer storms hit hard. Rain came down in sheets, turning the whole world to mud. For 2 days, Ethan rode in that downpour, making sure the cattle were safe from flash floods. Meanwhile, Clara was at the house, battling a roof leak with every pot she could find. When he finally stumbled in, soaked and worn out, she had dry clothes and hot coffee waiting. She told him about the leak over the stove, then pointed to his wet clothes already hanging by the fire to dry. He wasn't used to someone looking after him like that, seeing what he needed before he did. "You don't have to do all this," he said. Clara just shrugged. "We're partners. You keep our cattle safe in the rain. I keep you from getting sick." The way she said "our cattle" felt right. That night, the storm got even meaner. As he lay in bed, a soft knock came at his door. It was Clara. Her hair was in a braid, and she looked worried. "I'm sorry," she said, "but my ceiling is leaking now. The room is flooding." He got up right away. Sure enough, water was dripping onto her floor. "You can't sleep in here," he said. "You'll take my room. I'll sleep on the sofa. It's not up for debate." He gathered her things and led her to his dry room. As he was about to leave, she stopped him. "Ethan, thank you for the respect." He turned and told her that was just basic decency. "You'd be surprised how rare that is," she answered quietly. Sleep wasn't coming easy. But listening to that storm, Ethan realized something had changed for good. Clara was in his bed, in his room. He didn't feel trapped, he felt protective. He was just glad she was safe and dry right here. By morning, the world was washed clean. The storm had done a number on the roof, though. It was bad. He told her, "I'll need to ride to town for supplies. This'll take a week to fix." Clara didn't hesitate. "I'll come with you. We can measure it out together." So they spent the morning up on that roof, working side by side like they'd been doing from the start. When they climbed down, he just watched her. She moved around the ranch now like she owned it, an equal. "What is it?" she asked, catching his eye. He just shook his head. "Nothing," he said. "Just thinking, in 4 days we'll be married, and I hardly know you at all." Clara smiled. "Then ask me something." So he did. "What's your favorite book?" She seemed surprised. "Jane Eyre. My uncle said it was too radical for a lady." "Because she's got a mind of her own," Ethan said, his voice dry as dust. That earned him a laugh. Then she asked him for a secret. He thought for a bit. "I can play the harmonica. Taught myself one winter, snowed in for 3 weeks straight." They kept talking like that, sharing little pieces of themselves over coffee. She'd wanted to be a doctor. He'd once set his own broken arm. They were building the kind of trust they'd need soon enough. On their last evening before the wedding, Ethan found her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. "Are you afraid?" she asked him quiet-like. He could have lied, but they'd promised honesty. "Yeah," he admitted. "Afraid I'll fail you. That you'll realize you made a mistake tying yourself to a man who only knows how to be alone." Clara took his hand. "I'm scared too," she said. "Afraid we're building something beautiful on a legal paper, and one day that won't be enough to hold it all together." "So we're both terrified," Ethan said, squeezing her hand. "Good. At least we're terrified together." Her laugh eased something tight in his chest. Tomorrow they'd make promises before the Reverend. But sitting there, he figured they'd already made the ones that mattered. To try. To be honest. The rest was just paperwork. He looked at her. "Clara, I'm glad you didn't get back on that stagecoach." She met his gaze. "So am I." They sat in the dark, holding hands, neither wanting to let go. And for the first time in 10 long years, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he didn't have to face the world alone after all. The wedding itself was over in 15 minutes, held in Reverend Calloway's small office. Clara wore a simple gray dress she'd sewn herself. Ethan wore his only suit. The words were standard, but when he took her hand and spoke his vows, he truly meant them. This wasn't about convenience anymore. This was a choice. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, they just squeezed each other's hands. It felt more real than a kiss. Mrs. Henderson had a small cake and coffee for them at the boarding house. After an hour of well wishes, they rode back to the ranch, under the blazing afternoon sun. Nothing had changed, but somehow everything had. "Well," Clara said, as they rode up to the house. "We did it." "We did," Ethan agreed. He looked at this woman, his wife, and said, "I guess it should feel different." "Does it?" she asked. He thought about it. "No, and yes. The promises are real now. Permanent." "Permanent unless we choose otherwise," Clara corrected him gently. "The marriage gives us safety. The partnership is what we build every day." That night at dinner, the air was thick with things unsaid. They were married, but still sleeping in separate rooms. "I've been thinking," Clara said, breaking the silence, "about the sleeping arrangements." Ethan's heart picked up its pace. "Yeah," he said. "The leak in my old room is fixed. I should move my things back." She held his gaze. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't." The question just hung there between them. This wasn't a normal marriage. It never had been. "What would you prefer?" he asked, turning it back on her. "I asked you first," she said softly. "All right." The honest answer. He took a breath. "I don't rightly know. Part of me says we should keep things as they are. Simple. But another part remembers that night of the storm. Having you safe in my room. It just felt right." Clara's face softened. "I felt that too. Safe. Maybe our separate rooms are just about being scared." "Scared of what?" "Of this becoming more than a practical deal," she said. "Ethan, I'm not asking to consummate this marriage tonight. But maybe we could stop acting like business partners who just happen to share a roof." They finally had the talk they'd been avoiding. "Maybe," Clara said, her voice a little shaky, "we stop pretending this is just a partnership. Maybe we admit we're both scared and just decide to be brave." He looked at this strong, smart woman and knew she was right. She had become essential to him. "I care about you," he admitted, "and it scares the hell out of me." She promised she wasn't going anywhere. She had put down roots. "This is my home now, too," she said, reaching for his hand. "I promise I'll fight for what we're building." He took her hand. "I can promise that, too." "Then let's stop sleeping in separate rooms," she said. That night, they were both as nervous as could be. When she came into his room, he pulled back the covers on the far side of the bed. "No expectations," he promised. She slipped into bed, staying on her side. Lying there in the dark, just listening to her breathe, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Something that was broken finally felt like it was clicking back into place. They fell into a new rhythm after that, waking up together, working together, and talking late into the night. They talked for hours each night, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. The distance between them in bed slowly disappeared. One morning they woke up in each other's arms, and from then on, they did not stay on separate sides. The ranch work continued. They hired two honest young men named Miguel and John. The four of them finished the fence repairs and got the ranch ready for the fall roundup. Clara's smart planning made the ranch profitable. Ethan soon found he relied on her judgment for every big decision. One evening, Clara suggested hiring another hand for the winter, saying the ranch could now afford it. Ethan knew she was right. Most ranch hands moved south for the winter, but Clara figured they would stay for fair treatment and a warm place to sleep. By the first snow, they had 5 hands, and the bunkhouse was full of life. But their success drew unwanted attention. Other ranchers in town gossiped about a woman running a man's business. Ethan ignored it until he heard Ben Morrison making ugly jokes about Clara. Something inside Ethan snapped. He told Morrison to say it again. The man, drunk and loud, said everyone knew Clara had taken over the ranch. Ethan's fist hit Morrison's jaw before he even thought. As Morrison lay on the floor, Ethan told him that his wife was a better rancher than he would ever be. "That is your problem, not hers." Marshal Davies stepped in, pulling Ethan back before things got worse. "That is enough, both of you. Morrison, go sleep it off. Ethan, get on home before you land yourself in a cell." Ethan rode back to the ranch, his knuckles bleeding and his temper still raging. Clara was on the porch, and one look told her everything. "Ben Morrison was sharing opinions about our marriage, so I adjusted his thinking." "Ethan," her voice was a mix of frustration and fondness, "you cannot punch everyone who talks about us." "I can sure try," he muttered. Clara took his hand to inspect the damage. "Come on inside. Let me get this cleaned up." In the kitchen, she bandaged his hand with a gentle touch. "It matters to me that people give you the respect you are due," Ethan said, his voice low. Clara looked him square in the eyes. "Why?" "Because you are my wife," he stated. "Because what we have here is real. Are we still pretending this is just a practical arrangement?" "No," he said finally. "We are not pretending anymore." A tender but fierce look crossed Clara's face. "Good, because I stopped pretending weeks ago." She leaned in, and Ethan met her, their lips touching in a kiss that was long overdue. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead on hers. "I love you," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I do not know how it happened, but it did." "I love you too," Clara whispered back. Later, tangled together in the quiet dark, he felt his last defenses fall away. "I was so afraid of this," he admitted, "of needing someone." "This is not weakness," Clara said, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "This is the bravest thing we have ever done. Choosing to trust, choosing to love, choosing each other." "There is no going back now," Ethan said. "Would you want to?" He pulled her closer, the steady beat of her heart against his. "Not for anything." November turned to December, bringing the first real test of their new partnership. Marshal Davies sent word that Tom Fletcher and his gang were back in the territory, moving stolen cattle. Other ranches were reporting losses. "We need to increase our patrols," Clara said, pointing at a map of their property. "We will have to set up a watch rotation at night." "That means someone is awake all night." "Every night," Ethan replied. "It is exhausting." "We will not have to keep it up forever," she reasoned. "Winter will make it harder for them. A few weeks of tight security and Fletcher will move on." They put the plan into action. Ethan, Miguel, and John took turns riding the fence lines in the biting cold. Then, on a moonless night, Fletcher struck. Ethan was on watch when he heard cattle moving wrong, being pushed hard. He spurred his horse toward the sound, his rifle already in his hands. He saw the shapes in the darkness, about a dozen cattle being herded toward a gap in the fence by 3 riders. Ethan recognized Tom Fletcher's silhouette instantly. "That is far enough," Ethan shouted, raising his rifle. "Step away from the cattle." The only answer was a gunshot that flew past his head. Ethan dove from his horse, using it for cover as he fired back. The cattle scattered in a panic. Back at the ranch, Clara heard the gunshots and her blood ran cold. She grabbed the revolver she kept ready and ran for the barn. "Miguel, John, they are shooting out at the east fence line. Ethan is out there alone." They saddled horses in record time. Clara mounted her mare, Daisy, and led them into the darkness at a reckless pace. If anything happened to Ethan now, after she had finally found the courage to love him, she could not bear it. She pushed the thought away and focused only on riding to him. They found him pinned down behind a rocky outcrop, trading shots with two men while a third tried to circle around him. Clara did not hesitate. She raised her revolver and fired at the ground in front of the flanking rider's horse. The horse reared, throwing the man to the ground. The other two, now outnumbered, spurred their horses and vanished into the night. The dismounted man tried to run, but Miguel cut him off with his rifle leveled. "Do not move," Miguel commanded. Clara rode straight to Ethan, who was getting to his feet, covered in dust and bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, but alive. She threw her arms around him, her hands shaking now that the danger was past. "I am fine," he said, holding her tight. "It is just a graze. What are you doing out here? You should have stayed where it is safe." Clara's fear turned instantly to anger. "Safe? While you are getting shot at?" "Ethan Hale, we are partners. I do not sit at home while you risk your life alone." "I know you can handle things," she interrupted, her voice fierce. "But you do not have to anymore. You are not alone." He stared at her, this woman who had ridden into gunfire for him, and his whole idea of strength shifted. "You are right," he said quietly. "I am sorry." The captured rider turned out to be a young man who quickly revealed Fletcher's entire operation. He had been hitting ranches across 3 territories and planned one last big score at Iron Creek before winter set in for good. Marshal Davies arrived at dawn to take the man into custody. "You did good work here," he told them. "Fletcher will hear his man talked. He will not be back." "Good riddance," Clara said, her arm around Ethan's waist. After the marshal left, they stood together watching the sunrise paint the sky. The cattle were safe. The fence could be mended. The crisis was over. "I thought I was going to lose you," Clara said quietly. "When I heard those shots, I thought—" "I know." Ethan pulled her closer. "I thought the same thing when I saw you riding toward the shooting. Clara, you could have been killed. So could you." She turned to face him. "We are partners in everything now. The business, the danger, all of it. I cannot be the kind of wife who just stays safe at home. That is not who I am. I am starting to understand that," Ethan said. "I spent so long believing that caring for someone made you weak." He looked at her, his partner, his wife. "I was wrong, thinking that needing someone was a weakness. But last night, with you there, I was not weak. I was stronger." Clara corrected him, saying, "We were stronger." Ethan agreed. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Life on the ranch was already moving on. As the sun set, Ethan realized he had not just been defending his land, he had been defending Clara. He had married her to save the ranch, but somewhere along the line, she had become the only thing that truly mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked him. Ethan smiled. "That the judge was right. He told me to build a family here. I thought that just meant paperwork." He took her hand. "But he meant this. He meant finding someone to share your life with, the good and the bad." Clara's eyes softened. "So you are glad the law made you marry me?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "I am grateful for whatever brought you to my door. It gave me you. And you are the best thing that has ever happened to this ranch, and to me. Even though you are stubborn and ride into trouble, especially because of that," he said, kissing her. "You have my heart, Clara, completely." "Good," she said, smiling against his chest. "Because you have mine, too, and I am not asking for it back." Winter came to Iron Creek, covering the high desert in a dangerous, beautiful blanket of snow. The cold was bitter, but Clara knew how to handle it. She had grown up with harsh winters and made their home a warm shelter against the storm. She filled the pantry and kept a fire blazing in the hearth. Ethan watched her, feeling a deep sense of peace he had never known. She moved with a confidence that calmed him. Their house felt like a true home for the very first time. They spent the long evenings together. Clara would read to him while he fixed leather tack. They talked about the future, about their pasts, and about the children they hoped to have one day. But all this happiness began to scare a part of Ethan he kept buried deep inside, the part of him that remembered loss and pain. He loved Clara so much that the thought of losing her was a constant, quiet fear. What if she left? What if he was not good enough? Fear does not listen to reason. He started to pull away just a little. He spent more time out on the range and made decisions without her. Clara noticed right away. "You have been quiet," she said one night, closing the account books. "Just tired," he lied. Clara looked him straight in the eye. "Talk to me, Ethan. What is wrong? Do not shut me out. We promised we would be honest with each other." He finally broke. "I am terrified, Clara. Terrified I will wake up and you will be gone. That I will fail you and lose you." "So you are pushing me away to protect yourself?" she asked softly. He could only nod. "Ethan, look at me." Her eyes were full of understanding. "I am not going anywhere. I choose you every single day." "People say that until they do not," he said, his voice laced with old pain. "My father gave up. My mother died. Everyone leaves." Clara stepped closer and took his hands. "Then let me be the first one who stays. Pushing me away will not protect you from loss. It will only make sure you are alone, even when I'm standing right here." Her words hit him like a physical blow because he knew she was right. He realized he was so afraid of a future loss that he was causing pain in the present. He was choosing to be lonely because it felt safer than love. He admitted he did not know how to stop being afraid. Clara asked him to be afraid, but to choose them anyway. She said she could not be the only one fighting for their marriage while he kept one foot out the door. He promised her he would try to do better. They held each other, but his fear did not just go away. Over the next weeks, Ethan made a real effort to be a true partner. Some days were easier than others, but a whisper in his mind told him this happiness could not last. Then, a February storm arrived that would test them all. The storm began with a sudden, sharp drop in temperature. Miguel, who knew the land, looked at the sky and warned Ethan that a bad one was coming. He said it was the kind of storm that kills livestock and buries buildings. They spent 2 days moving the herds to sheltered valleys and reinforcing the barn. Clara stocked the house with enough food and fuel to last for weeks. Ethan thought she was doing too much, but she trusted Miguel's instincts. The storm hit with a terrible fury. The wind howled and drove the snow so thick you could not see a thing. The cold was dangerous. They all gathered in the house as the storm raged for 3 long days. The snow piled up to the windows, and the constant wind made it impossible to sleep. 4 days into her trial week, a terrible storm hit. The wind howled and snow piled up in drifts as high as 12 feet. When it finally stopped, the whole world was white and silent. Ethan knew he had to check on the cattle. He said, "I have to see how many we lost." But Clara stood in his way. "It is too dangerous," she argued. "Wait another day for it to warm up." Ethan was a stubborn man. "The cattle cannot wait," he said. "It is my ranch and my responsibility." Clara's voice got sharp. "It is our ranch," she corrected him. "And I am telling you, going out there alone is a fool's errand." He would not listen. He grabbed his heaviest coat, saying he would take one of the hands with him. Clara grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. "Please, Ethan," she said. "Do not risk your life for this. The job can wait." But he just pulled away from her. "No," he said, walking out the door. "It cannot. I will be back before dark. Do not you worry." He was gone before she could argue, because he could not bear to see the fear in her eyes. He knew she was right. He was pulling away again, choosing the ranch over their marriage. He and Miguel rode out into the biting cold to check on the cattle. Most of the herd had weathered the storm just fine. As the sun began to fade, Miguel spoke up. "The temperature is dropping again, Ethan. We should head back." "Just one more pasture," Ethan insisted. "You go on. I will check the north section and meet you there." Miguel just shook his head. "I am not leaving you out here alone. We go together." Miguel's patience finally snapped. Your wife is at home, worried sick, and you are out here risking your neck. What in the world are you trying to prove? The question hit Ethan hard because he knew the answer. He was trying to prove he did not need anyone, especially not her. Fine, he finally said. We will head back. But it was already too late. The cold had settled deep into their bones. Ethan grew numb, a dangerous exhaustion slowing him down. He fell from his horse once, then twice. The second time, he could not find the strength to get back up. Go on, he mumbled to Miguel. Get help. Miguel was by his side in an instant. I am not leaving you. The world around Ethan began to turn white and quiet. In that quiet, he thought of Clara. He thought of all the ways he had pushed her away, all because he was too afraid to need her. Now he was going to freeze to death in a snowdrift, all to prove a point that never mattered. The foolishness of it all was crushing. Tell Clara, he whispered, but the cold stole his voice before the world went completely dark. Back at the house, Clara could not stand it anymore. Saddle the horses, she told the ranch hands. We are going out there. They said it was suicide, but her will was made of iron. She was going to find her husband. They rode into the freezing darkness. It was not long before they found Miguel's horse, riderless. 100 yards away, they found the two men. Miguel was semi-conscious, but Ethan was frighteningly still. Ethan was gone to the world, his body as cold as a stone. But Clara refused to panic. She took charge, her voice cutting through the wind. She sent one of the men, John, to get Miguel back to the house while she stayed with her husband. John protested, Ma'am, you ought to go back. We can handle this. Clara's reply was pure steel. I am not leaving my husband. Get Miguel home. Then come back with blankets and a travois. Now move. They moved. Clara slid from her horse and wrapped her own coat around Ethan, pulling him close to share her warmth. She rubbed his frozen hands, talking to him the whole time, her words a promise and a demand. You don't get to die on me, Ethan Hale. You hear me? We made a promise. You have to fight for us. You have to fight to come back to me. Terror was a knot in her throat, but she swallowed it down and kept working. When the men returned, they carefully loaded Ethan onto the makeshift sled. Clara rode beside him all the way back, her eyes never leaving his face, searching for any sign of life. Back at the house, they stripped off his frozen clothes and surrounded him with heated stones. Clara covered him with every blanket they owned, beginning the long wait. Miguel, who was doing better, came to check on them. How is he asked. His heart is still beating, was all Clara could say for sure. Miguel's voice was low. This is my fault. I should have made us turn back. Clara's own voice was hard. No, this is Ethan's fault. He chose the cattle over his own life. She sat by the bed, holding Ethan's hand as the hours passed. His skin slowly warmed and his breathing grew stronger, but his eyes stayed closed. By dawn, Clara was exhausted and filled with a terrible mix of fear and anger. You promised you would fight for us, she whispered to him. But when it got hard, you ran. You chose those animals over me, and now you are lying here, maybe dying, and I cannot even tell you how angry I am. Her voice finally broke, and the tears she had held back all night began to fall. She laid her head on the bed and cried. She cried for the fear, for the anger, and for the love that made it all hurt so much. She almost missed it when his fingers moved, just a little to touch her hair. Clara. The word was a dry whisper, but it made her head shoot up. His eyes were open. You are awake, she breathed. Thank God you are awake. He managed to ask about Miguel. He is fine. He recovered hours ago, she told him, her grip tightening on his hand. You nearly died, Ethan. I thought I had lost you. I am sorry, he rasped. You were right about everything. We can talk about that later, she said fiercely, but he held on to her hand. No, I have to say this now. I was so afraid of losing you that I kept pushing you away. His voice grew stronger. Out there, when I thought it was the end, all I could think was how stupid I had been. I wasted so much time being afraid instead of just loving you. My last thought was that I had failed you. But you survived, Clara said, tears running down her cheeks. You are here. We get another chance. I do not deserve one. That is not your call to make, she said, her voice firm. I am giving you another chance. But this is the last one, Ethan. If we do this, you have to be all in. No more walls, no more running. I know, he said, his own eyes wet with tears. I promise. I will spend the rest of my life proving I choose you. You do not have to stop being afraid, she told him. You just have to be afraid and choose me anyway. I do, he whispered. I choose you, Clara. Always. She leaned down and kissed him gently. When she pulled back, they were both crying. Rest now, she said softly. We will talk about this when you are stronger. I am looking forward to it, he said, and managed a weak smile before he drifted into a peaceful sleep. He was finally going to be all right. Clara stayed beside him, holding his hand. She chose to forgive because that is what love is. It is choosing each other when things get hard, not just when they are easy. Ethan had nearly died because he was scared of being vulnerable. But he survived, and in doing so, he learned the real lesson. Love was never the danger. Fear was. It would take time for him to heal, but Clara would be there for all of it. She had chosen this stubborn, frightened man, and she would keep on choosing him every single day. That is what a partnership means. And she had enough strength for the both of them until he could find his own again. Have you ever seen someone so stubborn they'd rather freeze to death than admit they need help? That was my husband, Ethan. He almost left me a widow just 6 months after we said our vows, all because of his own foolish pride. This story is about the high price of fear, but it's also about the incredible strength you find when you finally choose love instead. Ask yourself, is there a fear in your life that's keeping you from the people you love? For 5 days, Clara cared for him. She changed his bandages and brought his food, but the warmth between them was gone, replaced by a cold silence. Finally, when he could sit up on his own, she put his breakfast tray down with a thud. We need to talk, she said. You almost died, Ethan, she said, her voice shaking with a fury that was really just deep-seated pain. You rode into that blizzard after I begged you not to. Do you have any idea what it was like, searching for you in the dark? I had to wrap my own body around yours to keep you from freezing solid, praying you would survive. Tears streamed down her face. I don't want your apologies, she cut him off. I want to know why. Why you would risk everything we have for cattle that could have waited. Why you would rather die alone than admit you need me. Ethan finally looked at her, his own eyes full of a pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. Because I was terrified, he admitted. Every day, he said, his voice low. I wake up and realize how much I need you, and it scares the daylights out of me. I learned a long time ago that depending on people only leads to pain. So I pull back. I do reckless things to prove I'm in control, to prove I don't need anyone. Clara just stared at him. When I was out there in the snow, he continued, my last thought was that I'd wasted so much time being afraid. I was so busy protecting myself from some imaginary future pain that I was causing real pain for both of us right now. And that was so much worse. So what's different now? Clara asked, her voice soft. Because I finally understand, Ethan said, taking her hand. Losing you was my biggest fear, and my own actions were making it happen. A quiet moment passed between them. Then, in a small voice, Clara made a confession of her own. I'm scared too, Ethan. I'm terrified you'll wake up one day and realize you married a city girl who doesn't belong here. But I choose you anyway. That's what I need from you. To choose me, even when you're afraid. I do choose you, he said, his voice firm. "And I promise I will value my life as much as you do. No more stupid risks." That promise changed everything. It wasn't about big speeches, it was in the small things. He started asking for her opinion on ranch decisions. He shared his worries instead of bottling them up. When that old instinct to pull away kicked in, he remembered the feeling of dying alone in the snow, and he chose to move closer to her instead. It wasn't easy, but it was real. In return, Clara opened up about her own insecurities. They learned to be a true team, holding each other's fears without judgment. They were partners, finally and truly. When spring finally melted the snow, they walked their land together, not as a boss and his wife, but as equals. They had lost fewer cattle than they'd feared, thanks to Clara's careful planning. She pointed to a pasture Ethan had always ignored. "We should expand," she said, showing him the numbers in her little notebook. "We could run another 50 head out here." Ethan smiled, a real smile for the first time in a long time. "That's ambitious," he said. "I like it." Standing there, planning their future together, they weren't just rebuilding a ranch. They were building a life based on trust, proving that the greatest strength isn't found in facing the world alone, but in facing it together. 6 months ago, Ethan would have called this kind of partnership a fool's dream. Now it was real. Two people working together side by side with no one trying to be the boss. He stopped by the property line, looking over the ranch that was once his whole world. "I thought this place was everything," he said. "I figured if I built it alone, it would prove I was strong." Clara stood with him. "And what do you think now?" He turned to her. "Now I know the ranch was just an excuse to hide. I was lonely, and you showed me that true strength isn't about being alone." Her eyes shined. "You taught me the same thing. I came here to prove I didn't need anyone. But choosing to need you has made me stronger than I ever was." Ethan smiled a little. "We're quite a pair then, two stubborn fools who found something worth fighting for." That night he remembered how it all started. Just 6 months ago, a judge had given him a choice: get married or lose this land. He saw it as a raw deal, an injustice. Clara was supposed to be a simple solution to a legal problem, nothing more. But she had become his whole world, his partner, his best friend, the one person who saw right through his walls and stayed anyway. The woman who had literally saved him from his own stubborn fear. "Clara," he whispered. She stirred beside him. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me, for saving my life in every way that counts." She propped herself up. "You saved mine too, Ethan. I was lost when I got here. You gave me a home and a reason to believe in myself again." "I guess we saved each other," he said. And they knew they would keep on doing just that, day after day. Vulnerable, the courage to love without guarantees, and the partnership that had transformed them both. The months that followed were the most productive and profitable in Iron Creek Ranch's history. With Clara managing the business operations and Ethan handling the physical work, they created a system that maximized efficiency while minimizing losses. They expanded carefully, adding acreage and livestock at a sustainable pace. They built relationships with other ranchers, sharing information about rustling threats and market conditions, creating a network of mutual support that benefited everyone. By summer's end, the ranch employed 8 permanent hands, plus seasonal workers during roundups. The cattle operation had grown to over 400 head, and the ranch house itself had been expanded, a new wing with 2 additional bedrooms because Clara was pregnant, and they'd already started talking about the family they wanted to build. The news of Clara's pregnancy had brought Ethan to his knees with joy and terror in equal measure. Another person to love meant another person he could lose, another vulnerability, another risk. But this time, instead of pulling away, he'd pulled Clara closer, sharing his fears honestly, and letting her reassure him that they would face parenthood the same way they'd faced everything else together. "You're going to be an amazing father," Clara told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Her hand rested on the small swell of her belly where their child grew. "How do you know?" Ethan asked. "I don't know anything about being a parent. My own father was a cautionary tale." "You know how to love," Clara said simply. "You know how to show up, how to work hard, how to admit when you're wrong and try to do better. You know how to be vulnerable and brave at the same time. That's everything that matters." Ethan put his hand over hers on her belly, feeling the miracle of new life they'd created together. "I'm still scared," he admitted. "So am I," Clara said. "But we're scared together, and that makes all the difference." The baby arrived in early spring, a daughter with Clara's gray-green eyes and Ethan's dark hair, perfectly healthy and impossibly tiny. They named her Sarah after Ethan's mother, and when he held her for the first time, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of what love meant. This tiny person, completely dependent and utterly trusting, demanded everything from him: his time, his attention, his protection, his heart. There was no way to love her partially, no way to hold something back in case of loss, no way to maintain the kind of emotional distance he'd spent years perfecting. She required total vulnerability, complete commitment, absolute trust that love was worth the terrifying risk. And Ethan gave it willingly. The years that followed brought more children: a son named James, 2 years after Sarah, then twin girls, Emma and Grace, 3 years after that. The ranch house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the sounds of children's laughter filled spaces that had once known only silence. Ethan discovered that fatherhood was simultaneously the most terrifying and most rewarding experience of his life. Every scraped knee, every fever, every moment when one of his children was out of sight sent panic through his chest, the old fear of loss trying to resurface. But Clara was always there, steady and calm, reminding him that fear was normal, but couldn't be allowed to paralyze. The children needed protection, but also freedom. That love meant letting go as much as holding on. He learned to balance those competing needs, to be present without being overprotective, to guide without controlling. He taught his children to ride, to work with cattle, to respect the land that would someday be theirs. And Clara taught them to read and calculate, to question and think independently, to value partnership over dominance and cooperation over competition. Together they raised children who were strong and kind, independent and loving, capable of both vulnerability and courage, everything Ethan and Clara had learned to be through the crucible of their own relationship. One evening, 15 years after that forced marriage in Reverend Calloway's office, Ethan stood on the porch of Iron Creek Ranch, watching his children play in the yard. Sarah was 14 now, helping her younger brother with his reading. James was 12, already showing signs of becoming the kind of rancher his father was. The twins were 9, chasing each other around the garden. Clara had expanded into something that supplied vegetables for their whole family, and several neighboring ranches besides. Clara came out to join him, sliding under his arm in the easy intimacy of long partnership. Her hair was stray with gray now, her hands weathered from years of work, her face marked with laugh lines and sun exposure. She was more beautiful to him at 41 than she'd been at 26. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how wrong I was," Ethan said. "About everything I believed before you came into my life. Tell me. I thought strength meant being alone. I thought vulnerability was weakness. I thought love was the most dangerous thing I could allow myself, the biggest risk, the greatest threat to my survival." He tightened his arm around her. "I was so focused on protecting my land that I didn't realize the land was never what needed saving." "What needed saving?" Clara asked, though she knew the answer. "My heart," Ethan said simply. "My capacity to love, to trust, to believe that something good could last. You saved all of that, Clara. You walked into my fortress and convinced me to tear down the walls. You showed me that the thing I was most afraid of, depending on someone, loving someone, building a life with someone, was actually the only thing that could make life worth living." Clara leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You saved me, too. Remember?" I was so angry at the world, so determined to prove I didn't need anyone, so convinced that independence was the only thing worth fighting for. You taught me that partnership isn't giving up independence. It's choosing to share strength instead of carrying everything alone. They watched their children play as the sun set over the ranch that had grown from 600 acres to over 2,000, from one stubborn man to a thriving family operation. The Iron Creek Ranch was successful by any measure, profitable, well-managed, respected throughout the territory. But its success wasn't measured in cattle or acreage or financial returns. Its success was measured in the family it supported, the partnership at its foundation, the love that filled every building and pasture and fence line. It was measured in children who knew they were cherished, in hands who were treated with dignity and respect, in neighbors who could count on help when they needed it. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked, the question he'd been afraid to ask for 15 years. "Do you ever wish you'd gotten back on that stage to Philadelphia and found a different life?" Clara turned to look at him, her expression tender. "Not once. Not for a single moment. This life, this ranch, this family, you. It's everything I never knew I needed, everything I never let myself hope for, because it seemed too good to be possible. Even when it's hard, even during the bad years, the storms, the losses, the times when we fight and hurt each other, especially then," Clara said, "because those are the moments that prove what we have is real, that our partnership can survive difficulty, that our love is strong enough to weather anything. Anyone can be together when things are easy. We've proven we can be together when things are impossible, and we come out stronger every time." Ethan kissed her long and deep, a kiss that held 15 years of partnership and growth and learning to love without fear. When they pulled apart, Sarah was watching them with the expression of amused tolerance that teenagers reserve for their parents' displays of affection. "You two are embarrassing," she called out. "Good," Ethan called back. "That's our job." The children's laughter carried across the yard, and Clara smiled. "We did well," she said softly. "Look at what we built from that desperate arrangement. A marriage of necessity." "We built everything," Ethan agreed. "We built a ranch, a family, a life. But more than that, we built proof that love is stronger than fear, that partnership is stronger than pride, that choosing each other every day can transform everything." As darkness fell and the family moved inside for dinner, Ethan took one last look at the land that had once been his entire world. It was still beautiful, still valuable, still the result of years of hard work and determination. But it wasn't what mattered most anymore. What mattered was the woman beside him who taught him to be brave. What mattered was the children whose existence proved that love could overcome fear. What mattered was the partnership that had started as legal obligation and become the strongest foundation anyone could build a life upon. The judge had forced him to marry or lose his ranch. He'd married to save the land, but in the end, what he'd saved wasn't the ranch at all. What he saved was not just the ranch. He had saved his own heart. He learned to trust and to believe that happiness was worth the risk. The biggest joke of all was that the woman the law forced on him became the person he chose freely every single day. Clara Whitfield showed up as an unwanted fix to a big problem. But she walked away with his whole heart, so completely he couldn't recall life before her. She saved him from a lonely life lived behind high walls. In return, he gave her a home and a purpose. He gave her a partnership built on respect and hard-earned trust. Together they built a life that would last, showing their children what a real marriage looked like. They were brave enough to face their fears, not alone, but together. That was the real legacy of the Iron Creek Ranch. It was never about the cattle or the land. It was proof that love could beat fear, and partnership was worth more than pride. Ethan Hale fought tooth and nail for his land and ended up saving his own soul. Clara Whitfield came looking for a fresh start and found the love of her life. They both got a better deal than they ever expected. They both learned that the one thing they were scared of, needing someone, was the very thing that made them strong. That simple truth was the foundation of everything they built. And that is how a marriage born from a judge's order became one of the truest love stories the Arizona Territory had ever seen. It was the end of their rough start and the beginning of everything that truly mattered. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.